Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our salient characteristics of Paramhansa Yogananda from Swami Kriyananda's biography. We're on chapter 17, where he lists 32 qualities of the master. And we're focusing it on how we can emulate the way that Yogananda lived and use his life as a roadmap to our own freedom. So let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Guru Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence living within us, speaking to us constantly through our own intuitive inspirations. Guide us and bless us that we may fulfill our true destiny as human beings, which is to realize ourselves as one with God. Om. Peace. Amen. So we are now up to quality number 10. About Master, Swami writes, he was surprisingly innovative. He built, as far as I know, the first motorhome. He called it a house car and used it to travel around the country lecturing. Master told me he'd invented the lid for the toilet. He was also the first to suggest placing the gear shift of a car on the driving shaft rather than on the floor. We drove into Detroit with our invention, Master told Swamiji. People were very impressed. Now, this is something that runs all through Master's life and is extremely interesting and important. And you see his inventions ranged, from, when I say he invented the toilet seat, there's not much involved in a toilet seat. But the idea of putting a cover over the toilet that could be raised and lowered apparently was Master's idea. Putting the gear shift on the car, he would get engineers and friends and workmen that he knew to carry out his idea. The house car that he built, he ordered the chassis of a truck, like a cargo truck, a big truck. He ordered the chassis and then built a little trailer on top of it. I don't think he imported it. I think he built the whole thing, hooked it up to the automobile. Did he put the motor inside? I'm not exactly sure. No, it was more than a trailer. So it was a truck. He took a truck and then converted the back into something that he could live in. That's how it worked, because it was drivable, like motorhomes are drivable. If he had just attached it to the back of a car, a trailer was already there. Master just looked at everything in the world and he thought, how can I improve it? See, the motivation for doing this was not that he was an inventor. The motivation for doing it was he was acting as God himself acts, which is he's always creating. The divine is always creating. Everything is ever new. And many people look at the physical world and they see it for just what it is. And they take it as it is and don't have the thought form that the spiritual person has, that this is just energy in motion. And if this is energy in motion, the fact that it has assumed a certain form up until now is just completely a moment in time. And there's absolutely nothing fixed about this. It can be shifted into something else by the application of creative willpower. And Master, of course, was just overflowing with creative willpower. So whenever he saw anything, his mind was always thinking, and this is the other part of it, not only how can I do this better, but how can I serve? And everything he did was an innovation toward how can I be helpful? How can I make something that other people will enjoy? How can I solve a problem that other people can't solve? Among other many, many innovations of Master, when in World War II, I think that, yes, it would have been World War II. World War II, when meat was rationed in the United States. Now, Master didn't even favor people eating meat. he had to work his way gradually to that. In another talk that I heard, I mentioned, I heard that he said, for the first generation of disciples, he never talked about vegetarianism. For this, for the second generation of disciples, he encouraged them to eat just chicken, fowl, and fish, and to eschew red meat. Then the last generation of disciples, he suggested they should be vegetarians because it was important, but not that important. But nonetheless, in World War II, when meat began to be rationed, this is how I read it, Master felt sorry for all those people who wouldn't have meat anymore. So he began to experiment with creating vegetarian alternatives that seemed like meat. And he experimented with wheat gluten, and then he created a whole line of products that were designed to take the place of meat in a meat eater's diet. I mean, secondarily, it was also for vegetarians, but the motivation was those poor people who wouldn't have meat anymore. And he started a whole line of vegetarian meat substitutes. And from Mount Washington, everything was much more informal when Master was there. He just created a little cottage industry. And the monks went around and delivered. It was a food delivery. People placed orders and they delivered these innovative recipes that Master had created. Some of you, I'm sure, have seen the pictures of the restaurant that Master had, I think, in Hollywood. And it was a vegetarian restaurant, and there was a huge sign that said mushroom burgers. And Master had created something that was like a meat substitute that was made out of mushrooms. It was a very successful restaurant, and people particularly loved the mushroom burgers. With the meat substitute business that Master started, he reached the point where he didn't wish to run it anymore himself, and he gave all his recipes to the Latter-day Saints, who were also vegetarians, and it became the Loma Linda brand, which I really enjoyed that because when I was living at Ananda in the 70s and didn't have a refrigerator, but needed from time to time to fix my own meals, Loma Linda brand Natina, not Nutella, which is chocolate, but Natina was a wonderful meat substitute that came in a can and I could keep it up on the shelf. It wasn't that I was substituting for meat. I was happy to be a vegetarian, but it was delicious in itself. And, to this day, the Loma Linda brand of vegetarian meat substitutes, and Master was the one who made up the recipes. And then he just gave them away. He didn't sell them. He wasn't trying to become rich. He was just trying to serve. So one of the things about Master being surprisingly innovative, as Swami put it, is that Master was the heir to a very orthodox religious tradition. And so Master didn't innovate the teachings. He didn't say, "Oh, I have a better idea than the Kundalini. I can make up a better story about the chakras than the actual story about the chakras," or devotion to the guru. Sometimes people try to be creative, but they're not being creative in an upward positive direction. They're just reacting against what is. And they say, well, I have to be creative, which means I have to rebel against what is already established. Master was by no means rebelling. He was taking what was there. He was seeing the principles that were involved, and he was seeing how we could make it better. And now the other reason that Master was constantly innovating, and he was innovating, in ways that were related to where society was going. Sometimes people who are committed to an orthodox or a traditional path rebel against change itself. One of the reasons that our world at this point is in such an argumentative place is that one of the realities we're working with is that we are moving into a higher age. And the characteristic of the age we're moving into is energy. And that means that we are going to be looking for and finding ever more subtle forms of energy. And we're going to just be moving away from the only history that people on this planet at this time have, is looking backward into the age of matter. And part of the characteristic of the age of matter is that everything is fixed. That's what materialism is. I have my glasses, I have my hand. I know in theory that these are all just patterns of energy, but the forms seem very fixed. I can't make my hands and my glasses blend together because the vibrations are different and the forms seem very fixed. And that extended to social thinking, religious thinking, racial, ethnic, cultural thinking. I was heard recently about a friend of mine. He's more of an acquaintance, but I know him. His heritage is Jewish, European, Western Europe. He married a woman, a Latina woman from South America. He has a number of brothers. It might be as many as 5 or 6 brothers. Every brother has married a woman from some other culture, Vietnamese, Chinese, Indian. So in one family, it's gone from being this sort of clear self-definition based on religion and point of family origin, and now all of a sudden, all the wives are from bring in another culture, and then the children are going to be, of mixed realities, multiple languages, different heritages, all at once. Now, for some people who are thinking in terms of Dwapara, thinking in terms of the world reuniting in higher ages, the global culture is all the same. We have this Kali Yuga commitment to all these separatenesses, separate languages, separate food, separate everythingnesses. In higher ages, interestingly, there's a global culture because communication is global. We have a sense of transportation. We can travel about and meet others, and we can see that the differences that we thought were profound and deep are actually superficial. And even just thinking about that one family, the children then will grow up with an integrated sense, even not only husbands, wives, and their offspring, but in that particular family, cousins. Even your cousins are going to bring in multiple culture into your life. But many people see this as a catastrophe. And other people see it as a joyous change that's coming. So Master was there to bring in Dwapara Yuga. So he innovated in ways that made use of the increased energy. People would say that even automobiles, were a catastrophe for the planet. But in 1935, when Master went back to India, Rajasi supported Master to buy an automobile, and Master shipped it to Europe and drove it around Europe, and then shipped it to India and drove it around India. And he was there. He was in this car driving through remote areas of India in 1935, and it was completely from the moon for many of the people that he was doing it. But why would Master do that? Master was showing that this is a new age and this is where we're going. And far from railing against fossil fuels or, all these sorts of things, Master was out there pushing it because he knew where we were going. And one of the most interesting, it wasn't only that Master did it himself, Master also inspired. He inspired others who were receptive to the ideas that he had. I learned recently, or a few years ago, from Dr. Peter. Well, actually, first it was from Master, that Master said that the scientists who were working on developing certain drugs, and Master said that he was the one who put the thought into their minds of the antihistamine. Now, the antihistamine is a particular it's a particular way of affecting the human body and delivering medicine. I don't know anything about it, but they were trying to work on it, and then came to the understanding of how to create what is now known as an antihistamine. When Dr. Van Houten at Ananda Village heard this, Peter runs a clinic and is also a Kriya Bond devotee for his whole adult life. And Peter said that antihistamines, the invention of antihistamines, was a huge turning point in medicine. because somehow once that theory and how to execute it was understood, a huge door of helpful medicines opened up. And Master was the one who started it. So even though there's a reaction, even among spiritual people or devotees or yogis, against, certain traditional medicines and fossil fuels and automobiles and all these things, nonetheless, this is all part of the opening up to Dwapara Yuga and us having to make use of these understandings. All of these are discoveries. They're not inventions, meaning they're already there, just waiting to be seen, and somebody finds it. It's not like Master created a new human physiological response and then therefore was able to create a medicine. The human response was right there. Master just inspired the scientists to put the pieces together. And in the most modern times, we have Stephen Jobs, who almost single-handedly created the whole technological revolution, the communication revolution. If you just think for a minute and trace back, and already, time is passing and people take these things for granted. But he invented so many things that have completely changed our society. And Stephen was deeply devoted to Paramahansa Yogananda. It's it's well known in Silicon Valley, where I live. I think it's well known in the world that he had one book on his iPad, the iPad which he invented. He had one book on it, and it was Autobiography of a Yogi, and he said he read it every year. So here's this one man who's helping single-handedly to create Dwapara Yuga, and he's deeply tied in to Paramahansa Yogananda. So the innovation that Master had to offer, he was undoubtedly sending through this man, because he just came up with idea after idea. I read a biography of him, and one of my favorite parts of it, there were several things I really liked, but one of them was people were always encouraging him to do market research. And he said, why should I ask people what they want? He said, they don't know what they want because I haven't invented it yet, which was exactly true. He invented it, and then we discovered that we wanted it. We wanted to be able, to have a device in our pocket that was keep us connected all the time. We wanted to have access to any kind of music anywhere we were. No one could say, I want that, because nobody thought it was possible. Even to such things as people wanting him to do market research about colors. He refused. He said, I know what colors they should be. And he proved it. Of course, he failed sometimes too. But the point being that there is nothing, now again, this is the weird balance point, because Master was exceedingly orthodox about Sanatana Dharma. This is revelation. You need a guru, and the guru relates to you in a certain way. You need to meditate. And the way we are made, these are discoveries that the sages made ages ago. And in India, this knowledge has always been kept alive, even though it got lost in other cultures. This is just the way we're made. You can't innovate. You can't create new chakras. You can't make different rules for the Kundalini. So it's a very interesting balance between a tremendous respect for spiritual authority and spiritual tradition, but a complete willingness to continually innovate in social customs, in cultural mores, and in material things. The fact that Master thought to put a lid on a toilet is just like, when I think about that, when I think also that Master was totally tuned into every area of life. It wasn't like he just refused to pay attention to some of the more mundane aspects of life. Master had a tremendous understanding of human nature, and he saw the importance of a refined environment, and in every way just trying to elevate human consciousness. Even the house car that he invented, it enabled him to go out with his devotees into beautiful natural places, and they would camp. They would have the house car there, and it would be the kitchen and be Master's bedroom, and they would camp together out in the wilderness areas. And Master wrote many of his beautiful chants, which have so many nature images in them. He wrote them when he was out camping in his house car. There's a book by Durga Mata, which is called Trilogy of Divine Love. I don't know how readily available it is. Crystal Clarity has published it and may still be publishing it. It's a very, it's almost a diary. It's like Durga Mata just took notes, wrote down all the things that they did. She was his disciple from maybe the 1920s, I think. And she was the one who actually built the house car. Master instructed her on how to build it. And at a time when women didn't do this kind of work, but Master was like, why wouldn't women do this kind of work? If they can, they should. So she would wear overalls and went down to the shop at the base of Mount Washington, and she built the house car for Master because she could. And he encouraged her to do it. Why would she not do it? No, Master, I watched this in Swami too. Swami was no respecter of rules if the rules didn't make any sense to him. I remember when we were negotiating, he was negotiating for some kind of a real estate purchase. And you're only supposed to talk to your realtors. And Swami said, why? That's ridiculous. I'm going to call the owner. And it was like, well, why would I not talk to the owner? Of course, all these customs grow up for good reason. And Swami respected customs when there was a good reason to respect them. But just because it was the way it was always done, and this is something that we ourselves as devotees need to be working with. How can I serve? How can I make it better? How can I create as the divine creates with this ever new attitude? In the little bit of work I've done making costumes for children and working with our school plays, which I've talked about being in charge of the costumes, I've had lots of fun. I learned this phrase from someone else, which was, they said, sometimes you have to find a Martian solution. And what that actually means is if you were dropped on this planet from another planet, and the other planet had a completely different culture, so nothing about this planet was predetermined for you. You would just see things as they are, not as they are already intended to be. So when I would need issues, when I would have to solve issues with the costumes, or actually in anything in my life, when I would need something that it didn't exist in the form for the purpose that I wanted it, I would often go to one of these huge hardware stores around, or Home Depot, which I'm not sure. Yeah, Home Depot is still there, I think, but there was this other big hardware store, Orchard Supply, that's what it was called, just down the road. I don't think it's there anymore. And I would just walk up and down the aisles with the issue in my mind. I need something that will do whatever it might do. And I mean, I needed something to put my computer on that was a certain height, that wasn't solid so that the computer wouldn't get hot. And I knew that such a thing existed somewhere, and I found it as a dish rack. It was just a dish rack, and you were supposed to use it in a certain way, but it was exactly what I wanted. My friend Maggie, who also makes costumes, not also, she's the real costumer. I'm just a little sort of child running around in the corner compared to her skill. And she was making costumes for the three wise men. She made this marvelous multi-leveled hat. And when I looked closely at it, it was a Jell-O mold. I mean, you all might not even know what a Jell-O mold is, but they would make these tin aluminum tubs of various interesting shapes, and you could put Jell-O in it, and then you'd flip it over after it was set and pull it off, and you'd have this little interesting mountain of Jell-O. But that shape actually lent itself perfectly to this marvelous hat once you covered it with various things. Martian solutions. Like, just because it's never been done doesn't mean it can't be done. Just because this isn't the way it's usually done doesn't mean this isn't an improvement. And what that also does, it's not only that it makes the world better and makes things more fun and makes your costumes more interesting. It's not only that, it's that your mind never gets stuck. You never get fixed. So the Martian solution is the Martian has no preconceptions. He just sees things as they are. And if what he needs is a box of that shape to use for a certain purpose, he just takes it. and all of a sudden you realize it was intended for something else, but it's perfect for this purpose. And what that does is that always keeps our own minds flexible. And it in a weird way, it's a not in a weird way, but in an interesting way, it's a very spiritual thing, because nothing in this world is what it seems. We're looking at this material world. We think it's a material world. It isn't. It's energy, and behind that energy is consciousness. We look at our bodies. We know our bodies age and will eventually die. So we have this strange misconception that I age and I will die, when in fact I just wear this suit of clothes, and this suit of clothes does deteriorate, but I am something quite different. So in every way that we can keep our awareness of the world around us exceedingly flexible, and just always being willing to see it from another angle, that translates directly to our spiritual adventurousness. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Master says many people never advance spiritually for simple lack of spiritual adventurousness. This is the way it's always been. This is the way it always must be. There is no alternative except this one, that I am whatever I am, and I will always be, and all my children must be, and everyone around me must be, and society has to stay this way. That's why we're fighting so much with ourselves right now as cultures and civilizations, because nothing stays the same. And this powerful energy of Dwapara Yuga and the advent of great saints and masters into our world are trying to pull us in a wholly other direction. And if we've made our thinking so rigid that nothing can ever change, God himself can't change us. Master describes such people as psychological antiques. People become psychological antiques, sometimes from a very young age. It's not something that just comes with age. Some people, as children, just has to be a certain way, and they never allow themselves to innovate. And so they don't innovate within themselves. They don't innovate their consciousness or their lives in any way. We should always be willing, because it's happening anyway. So we should always be willing to say, well, that was yesterday. What will today bring? Who am I now? Age comes to us, and many people suffer terribly when they get older for the simple reason that they're not young. It's not even that age itself is actually that unpleasant. It's just that they're not young. And I want to be young. I want to hold on. I don't just look and see. I heard a beautiful statement from a woman who was in her 90s. And she said, every day I get up, and instead of thinking about what in my body isn't working anymore, I celebrate all the things that still are working. And it was just such a simple way to think about it. It's like, that was yesterday. Today is today. What can I do with what's left? Whatever's left, what can I do with it? Whatever I have, what can I do with it? Swami answered my question when I asked him about humor. I said, what is humor? And he said to us, I was talking about wit, that just comes out like that. He said, to a certain extent, it's a spiritual quality, because it's the ability to look at the way things are and suddenly see them from a totally different perspective. And that's what Master did. Master demonstrated it in the most concrete material ways. He invented things, he innovated things, he improved things, he inspired other inventors. And that was not merely a service that he did, but it was a demonstration. That which I do, ye shall do, Jesus said, and greater things. That's what Master is calling us to. God bless you.